The morning light fell in coins through the sycamores, turning the dust along the paths of Griffith Park into a soft shimmer. Dog walkers traded nods and coffee cups. Toddlers tottered toward the swings. Parents scrolled their phones, bent-necked and distracted. At the far end of the lawn, a man in a crisp white shirt and rolled sleeves took a seat on a weathered bench. His name was Graham Ellison, and in magazines he was most often described with numbers: net worth, stock price, the size of a new campus in Irvine. To the 9-year-old beside him, he was simply Dad. His daughter Lila broke free of his hand with the happy impatience of a child and ran into the grass. Graham half watched her, half glanced at an email about a shipping merger. His platinum watch caught the sun as he lifted his phone. The world around him was ordinary, chatty, warm, the kind of place he rarely lingered anymore. Lila had insisted on the public park this Saturday, stubborn in a way her mother said came straight from Graham. "I want to see regular people," she'd told him. And Graham, unable to explain that the phrase "regular people" lodged in him like a pebble, had nodded and told the driver to head for Los Feliz. He looked up again after a minute, an instinct honed by years of nannies and security. Lila was not alone. She sat in the grass beside a barefoot girl in torn sneakers and a too-big denim jacket. The girl's skin was a warm brown, her hair pulled back in 2 puffs by fraying ties, and in her lap lay a battered spiral notebook with a missing cover. She was not begging. She was teaching. Graham's posture straightened. The girl drew in the dirt with a stick, numbers and neat little boxes. "So," she said, her voice smooth and deliberate, "if you have 12 apple slices and 4 friends, how many does each friend get?" "3," Lila answered without looking at her tablet, transfixed by the stick, the earth, the little sketch. "Exactly." The girl smiled, not broadly, but with a centered satisfaction. "Now what if you have 15 slices?" Graham rose, phone slipping into his pocket, something between curiosity and protective fear pushing him forward. As he approached, the girl saw him. She closed the notebook as if it were a fragile bird. "I didn't mean any trouble, sir," she said softly. "We were just doing numbers." Graham stopped. The voice held no tremor of a child asking for permission. It held dignity, like a violin tuned just right. "You're not in trouble," he heard himself say. "What's your name?" "Sarai," she answered. "Sarai Bennett." Lila popped up, grass-stained and beaming. "Dad." Sarai showed me an easier way to remember 3 times tables. She's better than Miss Jensen. Graham met Sarai's eyes, then dark, steady, older than they should have been. She couldn't have been more than 10. He took in the scuffed knees, the toes peeking through torn canvas, the way she hugged the notebook like a shield. "Where are your parents, Sarai?" he asked. She pressed the notebook closer. "Sometimes I stay with my aunt," she said. "Mostly I stay around here." At the library when it's open, she was, he understood, homeless. It felt crude to place the word on her, as if the label might bruise. She didn't posture or apologize. She simply stood there, present and unembarrassed, in a way most adults never managed. "Have you eaten today?" Graham asked. It was almost noon. Sarai's chin dipped. "Not yet." "Come on," Graham said before the dozen scripts in his head liability, optics, boundaries could return. "Let's get lunch." Lila slid her hand into Sarai's, the smallest, most natural vote, and the 3 of them walked off the grass toward a corner diner with linoleum floors, and the smell of grilled onions drifting through the door. The diner was the kind of place Graham used to know. Order at the counter, pick up your number, watch a server in a paper cap bustle between booths. He hadn't eaten in a place like this in years. He gave Lila's name to the cashier without thinking. Sarai watched the trays pass on their way to tables, eyes tracking not with hunger, but with cataloging attention, as if she were memorizing a pattern. They carried their drinks to a booth by the window. Lila narrated everything at once. Puzzles, school, a dog across the street whose ears was flopped sideways when it ran. Graham nodded, but his attention kept circling back to Sarai. Her fingers were tight around the straw in her cup, though she didn't sip. The spiral notebook rested under her elbow, its edges soft with handling. "Where did you learn to explain like that?" he asked when Lila paused for breath. Sarai shrugged one shoulder. "Books. People at the library say I ask good questions. Sometimes the guards let me stay longer if I'm quiet." "And school?" Graham asked gently. Her eyes flickered down. "Hard to go every day when you don't have an address." The sentence landed like a small hammer. Graham opened his mouth and closed it again. He thought of the private gardens where Lila practiced violin, of the tutors whose invoices listed executive function coaching in careful bullet points. A woman in a floral blouse paused at their table with a smile as tight as new shoes. "I don't want to intrude," she said pleasantly to Graham, "but I noticed that little girl around the parking lot last week near the cars. I'm sure it's nothing. Just thought you'd want to know." Sarai's shoulders stiffened. Lila stared. Graham felt a hot prickle at the back of his neck, shame not for Sarai, but for the reflex he recognized in himself. The suspicion wasn't about her. It was about the story people told themselves when poverty entered the frame. "Thank you," he said evenly. The woman floated off, satisfied she had done her civic duty. Lila turned, stricken. "Dad, she didn't do anything wrong." "I know," he said, and knew that knowing wasn't enough. When they were done, 2 kids' meals wiped clean and a salad barely touched, Sarai folded her napkin with neat fingers. "Thank you for lunch," she said. "I should go." "Where to?" Graham asked before he could stop himself. "Back to the park. Or the library. Depends on the day." "Do you have a phone?" he asked. She gave a small laugh. "No, sir." He slid a business card from his wallet and touched it to the table. "If you need something, food, clothes, someone to talk to, you can find me." She studied the card, not impressed by the embossed name, not cowed by it. "Okay," she said, and tucked it between the notebook's frayed pages. They walked her to the corner, and she slipped away as if she knew how to fold herself into the city's background. Lila took her father's hand. "She's my friend now, right?" Graham should have said that friendships had rules, and parents and lanyards with emergency numbers. Instead, he answered the only way he could. "I think so." That night in his library oak shelves, leather spines, a painting his art advisor called important, and Graham called brown, he couldn't stop seeing the stick tracing numbers in the dirt. He searched for Sarai Bennett, Los Angeles, and then missing child. Nothing. He looked up shelter policies for minors, how to enroll a child without a permanent address, which laws firmed up at the sharp place where compassion met municipal budgets. He knew how to learn a market, how to smell risk before it barked. He did not know what to do with the ache he felt when he imagined Sarai keeping her backpack under her head not for comfort, but as insurance. At breakfast, Lila talked about Sarai with the bright fidelity only children manage. I want to bring her my puzzle book, she said, and a snack. Mrs. Reed says friends share. Not everyone is going to understand, Graham said carefully. He thought of floral blouses and tight smiles. Some people may not like you spending time with her. People aren't bad because they're poor, Lila said, and reached for the marmalade. While Lila was at ballet that afternoon, Graham asked his driver to take him downtown to the library. The building smelled like paper and cooling stone. In the far corner of the children's section, a girl sat behind a wall of books like a small fortress. She worked a pencil over a page with the serious hum people make when they forget anybody is watching. He sat across from her. I figured you'd come back, Sarai said without looking up. Oh? People like you get a look when something surprises them, she said. Sometimes you're curious enough to show up again. Graham laughed. What are you working on? Algebra, some logic problems. The librarian here, Ms. Alvarez, says they're good for keeping my brain noisy. Graham wanted to ask 1,000 questions and only asked one. What happened to your parents, Sarai? She did not fidget or perform. My mom died when I was 6, she said. Aunt Kendra took me sometimes, but she drinks. Shelters are loud. I like it here better. Books tell the truth more often. He did not tell her about his consortium closing a Singapore deal in 72 hours. He did not tell her about the press releases that described his philanthropy in verbs that made him feel generous. He slid the business card across the table again. I meant it, he said. Call if you need anything. Or just meet us at the park. Sarai took the card in her careful hand and nodded as if acknowledging a new fact about the world. Outside, Graham stood with his palms on the cool railing. He could orchestrate acquisitions that kept whole product lines alive, but there in the pale light on 5th Street, he felt small and very human. A 10-year-old had done what no quarterly review ever had, turned him toward himself. Sarai's days moved between the quiet sanctuaries she made for herself. Mornings, the park if the weather was kind. Afternoons, the library when she could. Nights, a strip of concrete behind a shuttered laundromat where the security camera didn't reach. She kept 3 possessions within arm's reach. The notebook, a pocket logic puzzle book with wrinkled corners, and a photograph of a smiling woman with tired eyes. Her mother, Leah Reed, wearing a canvas jacket that had at some point been new. She learned 1,000 small survival tricks. Which trash behind which bakery went out warm around 5. Where you could sit for hours and look like you were waiting for someone who never came. Which shelter doorways meant noise and which meant danger. She perfected a kind of invisibility that wasn't sadness, it was strategy. The librarian, Miss Alvarez, had noticed her months ago. She left granola bars in the same place, between the math titles and the puzzle manuals. Sarai always took one and left the second, something about balance or dignity she could not yet name. On a Tuesday, Lila ran toward her with a lunchbox and the promised puzzle book. They sat cross-legged in the grass like classmates, scribbling, stumped, laughing when a trick question finally unfolded. Graham watched and felt something like grief for all the afternoons he had traded for conference calls. At home, he told his wife, Marissa, that he wanted to invite Sarai for an afternoon at the house. You let our daughter eat with a child from the street, Marissa said, a pearl of fear showing like light through water. Now you want to bring her home? She's brilliant, Graham said simply, and Lila loves her. She's a risk we don't understand, Marissa returned. We don't know what she's been through. I asked, Graham said. She's more honest than half the people on our board. Marissa turned away. We are not here to save the world, Graham. She doesn't want saving, he said. She wants to learn. The quarrel hung in the air like perfume that wouldn't dissipate. On Friday, Graham did what he said. He had a driver stop at a consignment shop and paid for a clean outfit and a pair of sneakers in a size Sarai's foot would grow into. Sarai arrived in the clothes with her hair in 2 tight braids. She held herself at the threshold of their glass and stone house the way one stands at the edge of a museum display, careful, appreciative, vaguely out of place. "This looks like a hotel," she whispered. Lila took her hand and pulled her down the hall to the playroom, where a low table held puzzles and paint, and a collection of small objects that looked like science. They sprawled on the carpet and solved things out loud, each girl quick to celebrate the other. The house, however, had walls that heard. Marissa found Sarai in the kitchen taking a glass of water. "You must be Sarai," Marissa said. Her voice was polite, the way a law is polite. "Yes, ma'am. Are you enjoying the house?" "It's beautiful," Sarai said. Marissa's smile held its shape. "Tell me what you want from all this." Sarai blinked. "Nothing." "I want to learn just know," Marissa said, close enough that Sarai could see her lipstick wasn't smudged at all. "This world isn't built for everyone." Sarai's answer came without heat. "I don't want your world," she said. "I want books." Graham entered then, felt the temperature of the room, and redirected Sarai back to Lila. After he watched them disappear up the stairs, he turned to his wife. "What was that?" "I'm protecting our daughter," Marissa said. "No," he answered quietly. "You're protecting our comfort." She left the room without turning her head. That night, Graham watched an hour of security camera footage he would never normally have time for. 2 girls on a carpet solving puzzles, their heads almost touching. He paused the video not on Sarai's bare foot, tucked under her knee, not on Lila's gold bracelet, but on the space between them where you could not find difference. He decided, in the space where decisions feel like cliffs, that he would not step back. The lake house sat like a quiet thought at the edge of a forested shore. When they invited Sarai for the weekend, she packed everything she owned into a backpack. 1 shirt, 2 pairs of socks, the toothbrush in a sandwich bag, and the notebook. There were firsts, first waffles with syrup that had a story on the label about trees in Vermont. First boat ride that made her laugh out loud. First bed with clean sheets and a sound that was not city roar, but the hush of wind on water. Sarai ate carefully, waiting for others to start, tucking half her sandwich into a napkin for later. She flinched when a dropped pot clanged. She kept her backpack within reach, not from fear, but from habit. On Saturday evening, Graham asked, "Have you ever thought about going back to school?" "Officially?" Sarai watched a moth bump gently at the window. "I've tried." "You need an address. You need papers Aunt Kendra lost. What if I helped?" "You can't just put a homeless kid in a private school," Marissa said from the end of the table, the words tight enough to cut. "I can try," Graham said. Sarai's voice came so soft it felt like something sacred. "I'm not asking for a house. I just want to learn." Marissa held his gaze, eyes cold. "And when that's not enough? She moves in? Becomes one of us?" "Maybe," Graham said. "Maybe she already is." Marissa stood and left. The quiet outside doubled itself. Late that night, Graham stood on the deck and looked at the water until it reflected a version of him he almost recognized. Older, softer, less certain about the scaffolding that had held his life up until now. Somewhere inside the house, Sarai slept with a hand on her backpack. He didn't know what would come next. He only knew he wasn't willing to return to the version of himself who would have left the park without asking a name. On Sunday morning, Sarai woke early and slipped out to the dock. She opened the notebook and looked at the photograph of her mother tucked inside the front. The lake held the sky like a promise. Something that had been pushing at her for days finally found words. After lunch, she asked Graham, "Do you know someone named Leah Reed?" He stilled. "I knew a Leah who worked briefly at my company a long time ago," he said slowly, the filing drawers in his mind opening to a party where the air had tasted like bright fruit and a woman had laughed with her head thrown back. Sarai held up a folded paper she had found between the pages of a library book. "I found a letter," she said. It was addressed to a man named G.E. She said she was scared no one would believe her. She said she was pregnant. She tried to tell him. He never answered. The room seemed to tilt. Lila blinked up at her father, sensing a storm. Marissa's face had the white sheen of ice. "Are you saying—" Graham began. "I don't know," Sarai cut in. "But the timing is right. I just needed to ask if the man I thought could be my father was the same man who couldn't see me." She turned toward the door before anyone could answer. Graham did not follow at first. He sat very still and felt the past arrive whole, with its missed messages and unopened envelopes, the ways a young man believes he can outrun responsibility by speed alone. He found Sarai a mile down the road, walking as if she had always been meant to go forward alone. He pulled alongside her and rolled the window down. "Please get in," he said, no longer certain of anything except the fact of her, a bright, human fact. "Let's talk." They sat in a motel room with a bedspread patterned with flowers from a decade ago. Graham bought clothes and toiletries from the store across the lot. Sarai perched on the edge of the bed, hands under her thighs as if to keep them steady. "If it's true," she said, "then you left me." "I didn't know," he said, finding the only truth within reach. "But I never looked back either. I was a coward." She looked at him, not to hurt him, but to understand him. He swallowed against the rawness in his throat. "I can't fix what I didn't do," he said. "I can only promise not to disappear now." Sarai nodded once, then unfolded the paper again, smoothing its crease like a wound that keeps remembering itself. It took 2 weeks to move the question from air to answer. The first call to a lawyer, the second to a clinic where a nurse smiled at Sarai with the effortless kindness of someone who has known too many stories to be startled by this one. The swab, the paper, the quiet moment when Graham sat in his car in the parking lot, the envelope torn open on his lap. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. He drove home with the paper under his palm like a relic. Marissa was at the kitchen island when he placed it on the marble and let the silence say everything. "What now?" she asked. "We make room," he said. "We tell the truth. We do what we should have done long ago." Marissa stared at the black print. "You mean you do?" she said. "You do those things." Graham could not find a way to hurl anger without hitting himself on the rebound. "I hope you will," he said, "but I won't wait." News did what news always does when it finds a story with a wealthy man and a child who had slept behind a laundromat. Headlines split themselves between compassion and acid. He called a press conference not because he wanted to, but because he understood that secrecy would only make Sarai into a rumor. In front of the gray facade of the Ellison Foundation, cameras lined up like a row of single, unblinking eyes. Graham stepped to the podium and said the words he owed. "I made a mistake," he began. "I didn't know, and I didn't look. I won't walk away now." He didn't say "my daughter" for effect. He said it because the first time he tried to call Sarai that, the word caught in his throat and dissolved into a grief he couldn't swallow. He announced the Sarai Bennett Initiative, a network of learning centers that would do for hundreds of children what Sarai had done with a stick and persistence in the grass. Turn the world into a classroom. There would be mobile classrooms to visit shelters, legal help for obtaining birth certificates and student IDs, scholarships for students without permanent addresses, and teachers trained to explain in ways that made sense to kids whose lives had taught them to be resourceful before they learned long division. Reporters shouted questions about guilt and optics. Graham said, "This isn't charity. It's responsibility. The cost of ignoring children is higher than anything we'll spend here." The foundation's comms director wanted a sit-down interview. Graham said he would do it if Sarai wanted to. Sarai watched a clip of the host online and shrugged. "If it helps other kids," she said. She had a way of summarizing the moral math that embarrassed him with its clarity. On the day of the interview, she sat with her hands folded, small loops of hair frizzed at her temple. The host asked gentle questions. "What would you say to kids who feel invisible?" he asked. Sarai looked straight into the camera, a line of steel behind her voice. "They're not invisible," she said. "People just aren't looking." The clip sailed out into the world and landed in places Graham had never thought about. Church basements where volunteers watched it between planning sessions for lunch service. School offices where a counselor forwarded it to a principal. A phone in a shelter where a teen watched it twice for the way Sarai didn't flinch. The first center opened in South LA, a bright space with white tables and a wall-sized map where children could pin the neighborhoods they knew by footsteps. Graham stood at the back during the ribbon cutting while Sarai, in new sneakers and a dress she had chosen herself, sawed the red ribbon with oversized scissors. He handed her a plaque. "To Sarai Bennett, who reminded us that brilliance blooms in the cracks we refuse to see." Sarai did not cry then. She didn't cry when a little boy tugged her sleeve at the snack table to show her a skip-counting trick, or when a teenager asked if he could volunteer to help younger kids 2 nights a week. She didn't cry when Ms. Alvarez arrived clutching a plant wrapped in brown paper, beaming like the mother of a bride. She did cry later that night at the kitchen table when she slid the photograph of Leah across the wood and said, "I wish she could have seen this." And Graham, for the first time in a long time, cried too. Time softened and sharpened in equal measure. Nothing about parenting a hurt child is linear. When the court granted guardianship, Sarai moved into the room at the end of the hall with blue paint and a window that faced the pepper trees. She learned to sleep without her backpack under the pillow. She ate until her stomach unclenched. She started school that fall with a folder full of official papers that had taken a dozen adults to obtain. Marissa stayed in the house and out of reach. She was kind to Lila and civil to Sarai, which in a world of small wars was not nothing. She and Graham moved around each other like diplomats negotiating an uneasy truce. Some nights the distance felt like a room with no furniture. Others it felt like a fence they sat on, watching the girls swing in the yard, saying nothing they didn't mean. Sarai bruised and mended in rhythms only she understood. She learned to pack a sleepover bag without sneaking a granola bar into the side pocket, just in case. Still, some triggers were stubborn. A siren in the night could pull the color from her skin. A substitute teacher who barked orders could fold her into herself like paper. Graham learned when to press and when to leave the door open. School solved for a piece of her hunger. She gobbled math classes and begged for logic problems the way toddlers ask for another page of a favorite book. She made friends 2 at a time, cautiously, as if friendship might be a resource one had to ration. She called the Ellison Foundation's drivers the guys who know more streets than Google, and left them sticky note puzzles they pretended to struggle over. In 8th grade, she joined the math club and came home with a cheap plastic trophy that held more weight than a gold bar in the family's safe. In 9th, she made the varsity debate team and terrorized opponents with arguments that stuck not because they were clever, but because they were honest. She started volunteering at the South LA Center every Saturday, arriving early to wipe tables and staying late to make sure a shy 3rd grader named Cammy had a ride home. Graham measured the years not by the price of his company's stock, but by the book jackets that showed up on Sarai's shelves. Bell Hooks, Baldwin, Angie Thomas, a cheap paperback of Euclid she carried like a talisman. He found a folder in his office one evening with the letter Leah had once written, a stamp with no postmark, the date smudged. He placed it back in its envelope. Some regrets deserve a room of their own. Marissa, too, changed, though not on any timeline Graham could forecast. She had never thought of herself as cold. She had thought of herself as careful. Watching Sarai measure flour one afternoon for a batch of cookies with Lila, Marissa felt an unexpected hot sting at the base of her throat, a memory of her own mother, who had told her the world was a narrow bridge and proper girls held on. "You can lick the spoon," Marissa said, and when Sarai looked up warily, she added, "In this house, that's a rule." Sarai grinned. The spoon clicked, sweet and homely, against her teeth. On a Thursday in May, 8 years after the park, the Ellisons, those who still wore the name, and those who had been drawn into its orbit, sat on metal folding chairs at Chavez High School, while the principal mispronounced graduates' names and mothers cheered like good news had finally arrived. Sarai, taller now and comfortable in her bones, stepped to the podium with a red valedictorian sash bright against her gown. She did not glance at the note card tucked in her sleeve. "When I was little," she began, "I used to fall asleep to the sound of trucks emptying dumpsters. Sometimes I stayed awake just to hear which street they turned down next. The city has a rhythm, and if you listen hard enough, you realize it's counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Buses exhaling, crosswalks ticking, police helicopters making long loops like clock hands." She told them briefly about the park, about a man who had not been brave and then had been, about a girl who had found reasons to learn in the quiet cracks of the municipal day. She did not make Graham a hero. She made him a person. She talked about Miss Alvarez and the granola bars. She named Cammy from the Saturday program and got the laugh she wanted when she admitted she had once cheated at a logic puzzle. "I peeked at the back page, I'm sorry, I was 12, and that even those mistakes had been a kind of map. I used to believe I was invisible," she said. "I wasn't. I was unseen. That's a problem with the world, not with the kid." She looked toward the row where Graham sat with a hand on Lila's shoulder and Marissa clasped around Lila's other hand, the smallest visible sign of a truce he would not erase even if he could. "We build the future when we decide to look," she said. After the ceremony, the family crowded around Sarai with flowers and those lopsided hugs that feel like gratitude. Graham pressed a small box into her palm. Inside lay a pen in a plain black case. "It's not expensive," he said. "It was my father's. He didn't use it much. I think it's meant for someone who wears out notebooks from the front and the back." Sarai held the pen like an heirloom from a life that had finally admitted her. That fall, she left for Stanford on a scholarship that combined merit with the complicated generosity of donors who discovered their better selves late. She found a family of students who argued about ethics at breakfast and built robots at midnight. She came home on breaks and spent Saturdays at the center, as if sacred time could be measured in glue sticks and fractions. Graham kept the letter from Leah in his top desk drawer. On the first night of Sarai's freshman year, he unfolded it for the 100th time and read the line that cleaved him every time. If he ever finds you, forgive him, not for him, for you. He placed the letter back in the envelope. Some absolutions are slow on purpose. 4 years later, the June heat sat heavy over the bay as families fanned themselves with programs and cried in bursts. Sarai's hair was pulled back in a simple bun. The sash this time was the color of her major. She gave the student a dress she had scribbled in the margins of 3 different drafts, because she didn't trust perfection when the truth could do. I owe this to a library, she said, and to people who didn't look away. On the long walk back to the car, Graham asked her what she wanted to do next. It was less a question about career than about calling. Sarai looked at the pen in her hand and then toward a group of teenagers taking photos on the steps, their gowns like flags. I want to build something that outlives speeches, she said. The busts. Bennett Learning Institute opened 18 months later in East Los Angeles, in a former grocery store with good bones, high ceilings, and a mural on one wall that showed 2 girls sitting in the grass, one with a pencil, one with her head tilted in the particular attention of friendship. The caption read, "When children see each other as equals, the future begins to change." The Institute was a stack of practical miracles: a homework center, a kitchen where teenagers learned to cook, and the younger kids learned to measure, a legal clinic for documents, a small office where a quiet woman named Mrs. Vargas helped families fill out school forms they'd been told were too complicated. The mobile classroom buses were painted the dizzy yellow kids like. They ran on a route Sarai insisted should change constantly, so nobody could set their watch by the day Hope pulled up. Graham stood in the back again during the opening, because he had learned that some people are more useful when they take up less space. Marissa came and brought 10 boxes of book plates that read, "This book belongs to," because she had finally learned that belonging starts with a blank. You get to fill in yourself. Lila, taller now and full of gentle authority, ran the check-in table and told a mother who apologized for her child's spilled juice, "You can't spill anything here. You only make it yours." When the crowd thinned, Sarai walked the halls alone. She paused before the mural. Her own face, borrowed from an old photograph, looked back at her younger than she felt forever now. She reached up and touched the caption lightly with 2 fingers. A locomotive of joy hit her then, years of sleeping with one eye open, a press conference where she had perched on a stool and told the world she wasn't invisible, a kitchen where she and Marissa had finally found the choreography of making soup together, Lila's stubborn loyalty, Ms. Alvarez's smile when she cut the ribbon at the second center in Boyle Heights. She covered her mouth with her hand and let herself cry. Graham found her there. He didn't say it would be okay. That implies the present isn't. He didn't tell her he was proud. She knew. He offered her a handkerchief the way his father would have, and she took it like a person who understood she owed nobody stoicism. "Mom left me a letter," Sarai said after a minute, wiping her eyes. She had started to call Leah Mom again, sometimes, in a way that made space for 2 truths at once. "I want you to have it." "You sure?" "She asked me to forgive you," Sarai said. "I do. I did a while ago, I think. Graham took the folded paper like a sacrament. It was soft at the edges, the paper equivalent of a well-loved elbow. "I missed 1,000 chances to be the man I should have been," he said. "Thank you for giving me this one." "You showed up," Sarai said, and because she had worked with children long enough to know what virtue really looks like, she added, "Again and again." The Institute settled into the kind of routine that looks like quiet from the outside and like purpose from within. On Mondays, a class of second graders learned fractions by slicing oranges donated by a grocer who had once been a child in a classroom like this one. On Wednesdays, a volunteer named Raymond taught high schoolers how to draft clean emails to teachers, the soft skills that swing doors. On Fridays, Sarai took the mobile bus to a parking lot behind a shelter and read a book about a boy and a dog to a circle of kids who reminded her, in bruising and beautiful flashes, of herself. She learned to put down the losses without letting them harden her. She celebrated wins as if they were holidays. She kept the photograph of Leah in a frame on the office shelf between a stack of grant proposals and a jar of cheap pencils. Graham, older now, retired from the day-to-day of the company he had once mistaken for his whole identity. He joined the Institute's board and listened more than he spoke. He learned to say, "I don't know, what do you think?" to 25-year-old program directors who had vision enough for a city. He spent Thursday afternoons in the homework room, doing long division with a boy named Eli, who insisted they hide a piece of candy under the remainder every time they solved a problem, just to make the math sweeter. Marissa remained complicated, which is to say honest. She and Graham separated quietly one autumn, not from anger, but from a recognition that they had built a house with two very different blueprints. She moved into a smaller place in the same neighborhood. On Sundays, she taught a cooking class at the Institute called Recipes Your Grandmother Made Without Measuring. And she found that forgiveness for others sometimes pokes its first tender green through the ground when you forgive yourself. Lila applied to a college where she would study social work. She wrote her application essay about the park, but mostly about the day in the kitchen when she realized you could lick the spoon and not be in trouble. "I want to be the person who reminds people that spoons are for tasting," she wrote. And Graham, reading the draft, put his head down on the table and laughed until he cried. Sarai dated a woman named June who taught art at a middle school, and they discovered together that love is, at its best, a series of small daily recognitions. You're here. I'm here. We see each other. The Institute grew branches the way healthy trees do, organically, in directions the sunlight allowed. Other cities called. The board resisted expansion that would make the mission thin its broth. They chose depth over reach. They made their mobile classrooms look like joy. They paid their tutors on time and sent flowers when Ms. Alvarez retired with a laugh and a dance, the way someone does when they know they have done their part. On a spring afternoon at the original center, a boy with a cowlick and a stubborn streak put his hand on the mural at the end of the hallway. "Is that you?" he asked Sarai. "It was," she said. "I grew up." "Can I be on a wall someday?" he asked. "You already are," she said, tapping his chest lightly. "You're on all of them." He nodded with the solemnity only a child can give a promise. That evening, as the last bus pulled away and the cleaners clattered in the back, Sarai sat in her office and took out the pen Graham had given her. She wrote a letter she had been composing in her head for years. It was to Leah, but also to the version of herself who had slept behind a laundromat and had decided to believe books more than people. "Mom," she wrote, "I found a family the messy way by letting it find me. I learned that the world changes when we decide to truly look. I know you loved me. I know you did your best with what you had. I hope you would like this place. There is always an extra granola bar on the shelf. Love, your Sarai. She folded the paper and slid it into the back of the framed photograph for safekeeping. Then she turned off her office light and walked the long hallway to the door, past tables where earlier that day a girl had finally understood how to borrow a 10 and a boy had finally learned how to look at someone when he said thank you. Outside, the evening held the soft hum of the city in a kindness she had once thought it didn't possess. She closed her eyes and listened. The rhythm was still there, 1, 2, 3, 4, but now she could hear something under it, something that sounded like a future counting itself brave. Years do not end stories, they grow them. You could stop the telling here and it would be true, or you could follow the threads further and watch how small acts multiply. A judge who had once denied a plea for documents at the request of a woman with tired eyes read about the institute and changed how she saw teenagers with no mailing address. A donor who gave money every December, more for the receipt than the relief, found himself sitting on the floor of the homework room on a Tuesday in March, helping a girl named Angelica diagram sentences. He realized he liked adjectives more than assets. A bus driver who took the morning shift because his wife worked nights learned the names of every child on his route and began to announce them at each stop as if the world were a stage and he were the proudest MC. Sarai learned to leave the building at 6 most days because she had promised June she would. She learned, stubbornly, that leaders do not prove their worth by running on empty. She learned to grieve the kids who moved away and to celebrate when their postcards arrived from places with snow. She learned the taste of rest and recognized it not as weakness but as fidelity to a larger work. Graham grew older and learned to accept the way his hands shook a little when he zipped his jacket. He stopped playing the market with the aggression that had once made him feel like a matador. He began playing chess in the park on Sundays with an older man named Felix, who taught him that defense is as beautiful as attack. Sometimes Sarai joined them and beat them both and gloated in a way that made Felix roar. On a late summer evening, the Institute hosted a reunion for its first 5 cohorts of kids. They came with new haircuts and jobs and babies and stories. One boy who had once stolen crayons because he thought they were only for other people's children brought a box of crayons and a note that said, "For the next kid who needs to draw their way out." A girl who had won a debate trophy because Sarai had made her practice standing still while she spoke brought a pair of cheap high heels and said, "For the kid who wants to feel tall." As the sun went down, music lifted through the open doors. Graham sat on a bench outside, the same kind of bench where the story had first turned him around. Sarai took the seat beside him. She rested her head briefly on his shoulder, the way grown daughters do when affection has grown muscle. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. They watched as June guided a cluster of little ones through a craft that involved glue and glitter and a will to ruin everyone's clothes. Lila arrived late from her internship and went straight to the dishwashing station because she knew that's where the real celebration happens, where you wipe the day off plates and talk about everything and nothing. Graham cleared his throat. "I'd like to tell you something," he said, and Sarai heard the wobble he still tried to hide. "I read Leah's letter on the 1st of every month. I think I always will. It makes me grateful and sorry and brave." Sarai took his hand, easy as breath. "Good," she said. "Those 3 things together make a decent man." They sat like that for a long time. The way people sit when they know their time, however much of it is left, is being used right. When they finally stood to go inside, Graham reached for the door and then paused. "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked. "All the time," Sarai said. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't looked up from your phone." Graham smiled at the edges. "I was on an email about a merger I can't even remember." "Maybe that's the point," she said. They went in. The hallway smelled like paper and citrus cleaner. A child's laughter ricocheted out of the homework room. On the mural at the end of the hall, the girl with the pencil and the girl in the sneakers sat forever in the grass, a still life of possibility. If you were to stand in that hallway and ask, "What's the lesson here?" you would not get a slogan. You would get something slower. You would get the way a man learned to look and kept looking, the way a mother's old love traveled through time and made room for new love, the way a girl saved her own life by insisting on the dignity of her mind and then set a table long enough for others. And if you are the age where you know the weight of your own missed letters and unopened envelopes, the story offers a simple kindness. It's not too late to look up. You can still be the adult who sees the child others overlook. You can still bake an extra pan of cornbread, carry an extra book, write the check, and show up to read out loud. It won't fix everything. It will, however, fix the part of the world directly within reach of your hand. When the night ended, Sarai locked the front door and slid the keys into her pocket. The city breathed around her. She turned toward home, toward a kitchen with soup cooling and a friend on the porch swing waiting to ask about her day, and the streetlights laid their thin gold along the curb like punctuation. Somewhere inside her, the old rhythm counted off once more. 1, 2, 3, 4. But now, layered over it, she heard a new measure, complex and generous, like jazz. It sounded like children learning. It sounded like adults learning, too. It sounded, she realized with a smile, like the future keeping time. In the end, what moved a city wasn't a speech or a fortune. It was the moment someone finally looked up and truly saw a child. Sarai's journey reminds us that brilliance rarely announces itself. It waits, patient and stubborn, in the quiet places until someone makes room. We can't rewrite yesterday, but we can choose the kind of adults we will be today. The ones who look away, or the ones who lean in, ask a name, share a meal, open a door. If you have a table, add a chair. If you once missed a letter, send another. Mercy, like math, becomes easier with practice. Tell me in the comments, who is the Sarai in your life, someone you decided to truly see, and how did that change you? If this story stirred something in you, please subscribe and stay with us. More human-sized miracles are on the way, and your voice helps them travel farther.